behalf of RCL Benziger, we welcome you to today's feature presentation, Little Bodies and Big Emotions. Hi, my name is Nancy Bird, and I'm Director of Training and Development at RCL Benziger, and we are so excited for today's presentation. But for those of you that might be new, Pam Perrino is an early childhood advocate, educational consultant, and former preschool teacher. She has worked as a child care center director with the NAEYC and professional development coordinator for the Ohio Association of the Education of Young Children. Pam also serves as adjunct professor in the Early Childhood Leadership and Advocacy program at the University of Dayton. Currently, Pam serves as a member of the Ohio Child Care Advisory Council and Ohio Professional Development Network. And she's probably from Ohio, right, Pam? And so am I. So we're just excited. So we're very excited to have time today with Pam. Please find your chat feature or Q&A feature in your toolbar of Zoom toolbar, and that's where we will look at the Q&A, questions and answers, and or the chat. So Pam, without further ado, I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Thank you, Nancy. As many of you could tell by Nancy's description, like you in early childhood, many of us early childhood people hold multiple jobs, multiple roles within our profession. I'm so grateful and so blessed to be here with you today, and truly honored that I have so many people here so that we can have a conversation around these little people and their big emotions. It's such an important topic today with everything that's happening and that these children have experienced. And before I was getting ready to join you today, I was thinking, wow, some of the 4-year-olds that you have in your classroom, they've spent half of their life living through a unique time in our history. And that comes with some really big emotions. We're going to open in prayer here in just a minute, but I do want to just make a reminder for anybody from Ohio that's staying for Ohio approved credit. You'll need to stay with us through the end to the Q&A. And later in the presentation, we'll be asking you to enter some vital information for your Ohio approved hours. So as we begin today, and I have to remember to arrow down the slide here, I'd like you to begin in prayer with us. So if we can begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, thank you for listening to and answering my prayers. Your word instructs us to start children on a path with a strong foundation, so when they are older, they will not stray or turn from it. In my role as a teacher, please help me to work hard for the good of my students, treating each of them with care, love, and respect. Lord, bless me and keep me and make your face shine upon me. Turn your face towards me and give me peace. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Wow, lots to talk about today in a short period of time, but I'm hoping that we can get through a few simple kind of objectives. The first thing that I want to talk with you today is about examining and exploring children's emotions. We're going to go into more detail about some of the traditional beliefs and what we now know about children's emotions. And then we're going to talk briefly about some strategies and techniques that you can help to educate your children that you work with every day and their families so that they can learn to name their emotions so that they can tame their emotions. I want to start with a video, and I hope you can hear this okay. For some of you that are a little more mature like me, you might have seen this movie, but this is from a quick snippet from a movie called Kindergarten Cop. And I want you to think, some days does your classroom feel like this?
Thank you.
You know, kindergarten is like the ocean. You don't want to turn your back on it.
They're okay. Don't worry. Everything is under control. No. Monsters. What is this?
So it's a little over exaggeration of what our classrooms may feel like some days, but some days it truly does feel like that. So I want you to think a little bit about why the children chose those behaviors in that little snippet. Now, again, they're over exaggerated, but when we step back and kind of think for a minute, those children in that classroom had just learned that their most beloved teacher, this is the lady here in the purple walking down the hallway, was going to be on leave from her classroom for an extended period of time. And what we know is that children really crave kind of some routines. And I call it if you think about a bowling alley, the bumper pads that we put in, children need to have freedom, but they also need to know some limits so that it feels safe, because it can be really scary not to have limits. So if I find that I have this brand new teacher that is going to be coming into the classroom, I'm not sure if they're going to have the same rules, policies, and procedures as my older teacher did. So the reason I share this with you is I want you to start thinking about behaviors, because sometimes in our society, we have decided to label behaviors as good or bad. And instead, what we need to do as educators is think about the behaviors that we see and step back before the behavior began, because oftentimes there's this trigger for the behavior. So I want you to think a little bit about this as I read this to you. This is from the NASDE president in 1998, but it still holds true today. If a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we teach, punish, depending on our backgrounds and depending on how we were brought up and depending on our view of behaviors. Sometimes it's hard to finish that last sentence as automatically as we did for all the other statements. Little people come to school with big, huge emotions, and we often get so busy with the work that we have each day and worried about meeting the requirements of the academics that we kind of forget that emotions and behaviors need to be taught just like anything else. In fact, research supports this, that the most important thing that we can do to help children succeed in school is to develop resiliency and self-regulation, which all of these require me to be able to name my emotions, label them, and pick strategies for them. We often assume every child that enters school with the same life experience and skill sets. And yet I know you know that's not true. If we set a culture in our classroom that embraces social and emotional learning as part of the foundational groundwork of our classroom, we have greater success in interaction between our children. And that interaction becomes richer and more meaningful. There's been a lot of research out there to support the social emotional learning of development. And oftentimes you hear terminology such as challenging behavior. So there were reports out from Neuron to Neighborhoods, which was one of the first one, a Good Beginning research project, the Kaufman report on social emotional development, and all of these kind of monumental pieces of research discuss the importance of social and emotional development and children's readiness for success in school. These publications have often identified a number of social emotional skills that help children succeed while they're in school. What they have come to prove and show is that children that have confidence have a better time controlling their behaviors in school. Children that have the capacity to develop relationships with their peers and the adults that are meaningful have a better time dealing with their emotions in school. We know that a child that can concentrate and be persistent on a difficult task has a better time in labeling and controlling their emotions. We know that those that can effectively communicate verbally, and this is important because a lot of our children, especially during this time period where they may have been at home more, have to learn to verbally let their needs and wants be known. We know that the ability to listen to instructions and be attentive when another person talks are extremely important to my ability to be able to interact and interact well with my emotions. And then we also know that I need to have the skill to be able to solve social problems. I've done a lot of talking, and now I want you to reflect for a minute. And the question I have for you is, what do children do when they don't come to school with these skills? What do you see? I'm going to switch screens for a minute because we're having some technical difficulty with my words coming up at the bottom here. But I want you to think for a minute while I switch screens. And I want you to think that when children don't come to school with these abilities, I want you to enter into the chat box. What do you see then as the teacher in the classroom when these children don't come to school? So I'm going to stop my screen. I'm going to let you enter in the chat box while I bring up a different screen. So please, in the chat box, respond to, what do children do when they don't have each of these skills? So, Anne, if you can help me with the chat box, that would be great, because I'm switching screens. If you can come off mute maybe and let me know some of the responses we have in there.
Sure. Most of them are when children begin to shut down, they cry, they get upset, there's frustration, there is anger, tired, maybe not well fed, using language that is the result of making a big impact, like telling another classmate that they are not their best friends anymore. Again, they don't listen, they're disruptive. Those are kind of what's coming through, anger. They have a hard time getting along with other children as well.
Thank you so much. Those are such powerful ones. And I think the one thing that really resonated, I mean, the anger and the struggle and kind of almost lashing back at the next child. But when you don't come in with these skills, I heard somebody say tired too, right? So when you don't come into school with these skills, it's exhausting. It requires so much more effort for you to be able to interact with everybody else. So for a minute, I want you to all take a deep breath and pause and literally pat yourselves on the back for a minute, because I know this has been a tough year. Last year was a tough year. So if things aren't going as smoothly as you want, it's because you've got lots of little people that are trying to figure out these skills that maybe in years past they might have come to school with. In fact, I guess it was about 2 weeks ago, I was in Indiana, and I actually had several teachers tell me, I have 4-year-olds this year, but I feel like I'm teaching 3-year-olds. And they were going to say that some of these kids had not had a previous year school experience. And I said, well, what's the magic bullet then? Is that we need to back up and meet them as a 3-year-old and then adapt what we had planned so that we can meet them to give them the skills. And Anne or Nancy, if you can just confirm that you're seeing the screen okay.
Yes,
Yes.
we are seeing it.
Wonderful. That way it's better for everybody that's participating. And I'm going to use this technique of going to the chat box a few more times. And then we're also going to use a survey because, when we're online with each other, I love to be able to hear your comments that I can't do when we're a bit of a distance from each other. Let me see if it'll let me advance. There we go. So I have talked to you sometimes about this before, but I want to bring it back up again. There is something at the Center of Social Emotional Development at CCEFL that is talked about the pyramid. And really what I'm trying to stress here to you is that there's a variety of things that we can do to prevent those challenging behaviors that, when I have a difficult child like Pam in my classroom, when she leaves next year, I'm going, oh, hallelujah. I've lost, I don't have Pam this year, but, it's interesting. Sometimes we end up with an Ann or a Nancy, and those behaviors just come up and they're just in a different person this year. But there's things that we can do, and that's the great news. So when we're looking at these challenging behaviors that aren't appropriate in a group setting, as adults, we have to first focus on the prevention before we can focus on changing the children's inappropriate behaviors, because we have to educate before we can have hope for change. So the first thing we have to do is back up to that one of my favorite words, developmentally appropriate practice. And we have to ensure that the classroom is a place where children want to be, that the classroom is set up for children, that it is child friendly, that it is hands-on, that it is manipulative, that it's not requiring children to sit and do nothing or not be able to move about as they need to at this age. So that environment also has to be engaging, it has to be meaningful for the children, and it has to allow children to be able to select where they're going to spend part of their day. And then we have to be intentional about teaching children those skills that they need to have to do, right? So what are the expectations about routines? You know, those aren't the rules at home. So why do we need to have that rule at school? Well, because at school we have 20 children together or 12 children together, as opposed to maybe you only have yourself and your other sibling. So this is what the pyramid model looks like. So when we look at the foundation of it, kind of in that gold area, that's the relationships to form the foundation of the pyramid, and they're necessary for everything else that's above the pyramid. So, you know, and you've heard me say this before, if I don't know that you care about me, I don't care what you know. So children are not willing to learn until they can trust you and feel safe with you, just as your colleagues are. We have to be able to trust each other and have each other's back and know that on my worst day, you're still going to love me and you're still going to care about me. We have to, in that middle section there, around, and let me back up for a minute on the goal too, because that means we have to have an appropriately trained workforce in those classrooms too, right? So I'm going to give you a personal example. My first year of working full-time, I was in a toddler classroom. I had a K-8 license because we're talking 30 plus years now, there was no preschool license. And I can remember spending the first 6 months trying to manage a classroom for toddlers. And I can remember moving over to my director's office and saying, I am lost. I need help. I was given lots of great information on how to be a great kindergarten teacher, first grade teacher, a little bit of knowledge on a preschool teacher, but I'm lost with toddlers and I'm not serving them well. And she took the time to invest in me and give me more knowledge on being fundamentally appropriate for toddlers. And what a game changer that was. It helped me to see life through their lens. So for an example, she sat down on the floor with me and my children were running around all the classrooms. And here, as a young teacher, I had put all my learning centers along the walls, fearing that my children might tip things over. And she said, what do you see? And I sat on the floor and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's a huge open space. It almost looks like a landing strip. No wonder my children are running down the middle of the classroom. It's so inviting. So we have to have the knowledge. Once we have the knowledge, then we can move to the second green level where we have high quality environments, we have nurturing relationships, and we're setting up this wonderful, lovely environment that is built for children of this age. And in addition, when we do that well, our environment becomes this third teacher that helps support children to have positive engagement with other children in the classroom. So then we move up to this next level where we are making sure that we target and teach social emotional skills that children need to succeed and the skills that might be not mastered by every child in the classroom. And if we do all of that, do you see how tiny the top of the pyramid is? Very few children will actually need intense intervention because we've led the way with the modeling of our behaviors and our environments to show children what it looks like. We just haven't told them, we've shown them, and we've let them practice that. We will have resources at the end of the PowerPoint if you're interested in finding out more information. I do link these resources from which I've pulled this information. So I use the title here, Identifying Teachable Moments. As educators, we are so busy often that we don't respond to children's behavior in a timely manner. We tend to respond to it when it's between that yellow and that red arrow. And just like when we're in disagreements with our significant others, when emotions are heated and tempers are up, nobody is really listening to the other person because we're too busy trying to make our point, or we're just too frustrated that we can't process new information. So if you look at where the purple arrow is, that's where things are going wonderfully. You know, it's the perfect day. The classroom's just running along wonderfully. Everything is happening as you planned. And then that space between the purple and the green arrow is where things are still going okay. But when they get to the green towards the yellow, then things are starting to escalate. So the best opportunity to intervene and start to teach strategies is between the purple and the green, right? When things start to get escalated, we need to teach coping mechanisms. We need to, I notice, I see. How are you feeling? Oh, if you're feeling that way, you can, and help the child learn some new strategies so that, and then talk to them as well about, when I'm angry, sometimes my stomach rumbles and I can feel my shoulders get tighter. We have to label that so that it gives a name for that emotion. So when things start to get a little out of hand, we have to be able to redirect at the correct time, because by the time it's escalated, it's too late to redirect and teach new strategy. So that space between the purple and the green is a very narrow time. So I want you to think about this for a minute. And in the chat box, have you ever found yourself between the purple and the red? And I guess what my question should be, let me back it up. What do you think about targeting the children between the purple and the green? Do you think that's something that you can do? Have you ever looked for triggers? Maybe put down some of the most common triggers that you see in the children that you're working with currently. And again, either Ann or Nancy, if you can help me with some of the things that pop up.
Pam, there is a question
Sure.
that I wanted to share that someone has asked, and maybe as they're putting things in, we can ask that question.
Sure.
And basically, what happens when you have children who have the tools to use, but are choosing not to? So what do you suggest for children who are aware of tools they can use when frustrated in the classroom but fail to use them, and instead have big reactions and start using physical and verbal force to express their emotions, even when these tools are discussed over and over again?
So I think the first thing we need to do as educators is to back up and take a big breath on these children, because they can really challenge us. And I think one of the first things you can do is, yes, they might have the tools, but they may not realize their own triggers. So I would suggest to you to try to start finding where the child's triggers are. What catapults that child into kind of that spin. And that is the time that you want to intervene then. If you know that typically when Pam puts her hands on this child, this is going to trigger this child. And yes, the child has better strategies, because it takes a bit of practice and patience to change behaviors. Children choose behaviors because it gets them something or they avoid something. So I understand your frustration and I hear it, but I don't think there's any child, and this is my belief, professionally and personally, that chooses to totally fall apart in front of their peers. They lack the steps to avoid that trigger. So I'm going to give you a perfect example. It was with an older child, and it comes to mind. I used to coach basketball for junior high, and I had one young man that had ADHD, and I could tell by the posture that he had that things were going to escalate. And so this young man, I would grab my earring and I would call his name, and this would be his indication that he was about to explode, because he hadn't learned self-regulation early. He is now in his 20s, and if he's at our house, I still can pull my earring and we laugh, but I don't have to do it as frequently. So I'm not saying that the child doesn't have the strategies, but you may need to teach the child how to implement those strategies sooner before they've escalated.
Thanks, Pam. And some of the comments in the chat, many of them focus around transition times in terms of when things begin to happen. And that could be during the schedule, that could be dropping off and picking up at the times. Some other times are when missing parents went away on a trip, changing centers and moving from one center to the next. Those kind of things, not sharing toys. And sometimes maybe there isn't a reason. And maybe we don't know what that reason really is. So those were some of the key comments that were made.
And they're
Oftentimes,
pretty typical. Those are
yeah.
pretty typical, the transitions. And sometimes when you say that you don't know, that I thank you for being so honest, because I think sometimes we have to learn to be better observers and figure out what the triggers are, because you know what, all of us have our hot buttons. One thing that may trigger me doesn't trigger you, and children are no different. And we have to remember, when they're 3, 4, and 5 years old, they haven't really had a lot of time to develop these strategies yet. And the strategies, that they've used for coping the last couple of years may not translate well into a classroom with a large number of children. So you are spot on with what you're seeing. And I'm not suggesting this is easy work. It's not. It takes a lot of time. It takes some effort. So I want to talk a little bit more about a few more strategies. And you've heard me use this. We have to teach children to name it before they can tame it. Oftentimes what happens is children know these feelings, but they don't know how to give it a vocabulary. Some children are brought up in households where, no offense, but suck it up, buttercup, or get over it. You do it because I say you're going to do it. And that only works for so long, because if we don't give children the vocabulary, then it's really hard to figure out strategies on how to handle those emotions, because there's a big difference between being angry and being frustrated. Although it can look the same, we don't want to use the same strategies for those. They may need to be just nuanced enough to help the child to deal better with those situations. And oftentimes, and again, it depends on how we were brought up, but a lot of times we were taught to say, I'm sorry. I professionally and personally do not believe in making a child say, I'm sorry, because if all we do is tell them to say they're sorry, all they're going to do is continue to do that behavior and then apologize afterward. A much better strategy is to debrief with them about what happened, how that made them feel, how it made the other child feel. And you can suggest that it might be best to go over and apologize if they're truly sorry for their behavior. But I have seen young children do this, go over and knock something over and then go to the other child and say, I'm sorry, because they've learned as long as they say, I'm sorry, they don't have to change their behavior. So I'm not saying that being kind to people and apologizing isn't important. What I'm saying is we have to give them a better strategy so that there's not a need to say, I'm sorry next time. So we have to give them better responses so that they can better self-regulate their behavior.
Pam, one more question, as you're transitioning screens, and that is, and this is probably an age-old concern, what happens when you're doing all this work at school and then the strategies are not being implemented at home?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I used to get really frustrated with that when I was a bit younger. And as I've gotten older, the one piece of reflection I can give you is that I've learned I can only control what I can control. And school environment's very different than the home environment. And young children are pretty bright. And if we make it clear that those are the policies and those are the rules here at school for this reason, in time, with consistency, it will make a difference. And I understand your frustration. I had a child once that, I had toddlers at one point and they were biting. And we had agreed with the family for some strategies. But, if the child left on a day where she had bitten, dad would take her to out for fast food somewhere to her favorite place. And we had to educate dad as well, right? So it's not just educating the child, but it's educating the family too, that there can be different strategies and that there are long-term effects for some of the strategies we're teaching. But we have to look at it as we're partners with the family, and there should be no judgment. And that's really hard because we're human, but we have to help educate our families as we're teaching our children about the need to talk about emotions. And remember, we're talking with traditions within family and history of perhaps of the way they're brought up. So we need to be patient with the family too, that it's going to take time for them to kind of see what we're working on. And you may not accomplish it in your preschool classroom or your kindergarten classroom. It may take until third grade that the third grade teacher sees the fruit of your labor, but you're investing in the child by working with the family. And that is a great question, because there is not one single teacher that hasn't worked in this profession that hasn't faced that hurdle. But do the best you can in the space that you have to provide the child with the strategies that they need to succeed.
That's really helpful, Pam. And one more before you move on. That is, What age do children have empathy that they can truly understand that their behavior affected their friend?
Yeah, that's a really good one. They start to develop empathy in preschool, but you have to remember that they don't have self-regulation fully developed in the frontal lobe until around the age of 8. Let me say that again. The frontal lobe does not develop for self-control and self-regulation until the age of 8. So the reason you're frustrated, the reason you feel like you have done that 10 times already today is that frontal lobe hasn't fully developed. And that's where that environment comes in and is so important. That is an excellent question. Thank you for sharing that. Are we okay to move on?
There is one more question.
Sure.
How do you deal with angry children, especially when parents think it's okay?
Yeah, that's a good one. So dealing with an angry child, and I think the biggest thing in society is we've been taught it's not okay to be angry. And I don't think that's a healthy thing, because let's face it, everybody that's on this call today has been angry at some point or another, probably within the last week. It's an emotion. It's an emotion that was given to us by God. And our responsibility is to teach children what to do with that. So when a child becomes so angry that they can't function within the group, we have to give a safe place for that child to go. In my classroom that I always had a soft area. It was underneath a table. And the rule was no more than one person under there at a time. I had some blankets and some pillows, and children could retreat to that area when they just were feeling so overwhelmed. Because let's face it, it's not normal to be in a classroom with 12 children your own age or 16 children your own age. Again, the frontal lobe isn't developed. They don't have all those skills. So they are going to experience immense frustration trying to survive in a group, because remember, they're still very egocentric and they haven't developed empathy. So it can be really frustrating to have to wait my turn, to let somebody else play with that before I play with it. So I suggest to give them some places to calm down and to validate their anger. It is okay to be angry, but it is not okay to hit Pam. It is okay to be angry or frustrated when it's not your turn, but we can find something else to do.
Pam, thank you. There are many more questions coming in, but why don't we hold those so you can continue, and we'll get to those questions a little bit later.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So part of it, and this is really perfect timing, and I'm so glad that you shared some of the questions, because I think this is what we're feeling right now, is this rub between the traditional discipline beliefs that many of us may have even been raised with versus what we know. So let's examine some of the traditional discipline beliefs that are out there. The first one is, if I just make that other person change their behavior, all my problems are going to be solved. If only I could make Pam do that, then my day would be great. In order to get what I want or to get somebody to change, I have to coerce them. My favorite examples, if you don't settle down right now, and if you don't get quiet, you're going to lose your outside playtime, or you're going to have quiet lunch. We feel that coercing someone will get them to do what we want. When we fail to make, here's another one. When we fail to make someone obey, then it must mean that Pam's a bad kid and her behavior was chosen by her because she's trying to give me a hard time. And let's face it, it feels like that sometimes. If these children, here's another one, would only do what I say, then life would be wonderful. The problem with that is they need to be able to tell them what to, then you have to monitor children and constantly tell them what to do for the rest of their life. And that's not what we want. We want children to learn to self-regulate. Here's another one. There must be a punishment for that behavior. There has to be consequences, or they're doomed to repeat it forever. Here's another one. We should always avoid conflict. We need conflict to grow and learn. You know, I had a colleague just recently, Sharon, I'm looking on my desk here. She called conflict heated fellowship. And I love that word because conflict's okay. It's what we do with conflict. Think about when we become adults. We need to learn how to handle that. And the reason that some of these traditional discipline beliefs are not functional is because fear is not a motivator, because it creates people who live in fear and do not trust, and therefore they fear to make a mistake. And the reality is learning is making mistakes and choosing different choices next time. So instead of these traditional discipline beliefs, what I would like to recommend to you is a head-heart connection. It's our job to help children shepherd their emotions and learn their skills and strategies that help children name their emotions so they can learn to tame them. We have to help children learn those social skills. We have to teach children to change ourselves first. The child has to change their response in order to gain self-regulation. And us as adults have to change our response. And that's really hard. You know, my son, when he was little, boy, he could trigger my reactions. One time he even looked at me and says, "Mommy, you wouldn't talk to other kids like that." And, you know, he kind of got me into reality. And I said, "You know, Mario, you're right. I'm so sorry. That was not a respectful response to you." And we have to be willing to acknowledge our reactions sometimes fuel the children's reactions, because it's human nature. We have to embrace that we're empowered by choosing to control ourselves instead of having to look to everyone else to always control us. That has to feel good. When things don't go our way, what we need to learn to do instead is to find solutions, to find strategies, ask for guidance. And we need to create an environment as adults that makes that okay. We must teach behaviors in order for children to learn them. Conflict is essential to learning, and we can't avoid that. We are going to have meltdowns with this age group. We are going to have temper tantrums with this age group. Remember, this frontal lobe is not developed until the age of 8. It's going to take some time, and it's hard work. And what we need to make a commitment to is that love is the best motivator of all for learning and growth. So as adults, we have to learn to control our own reactions and our own responses. We have to make conflict okay. But in the result of making the conflict okay, we have to teach new strategies to the children in our classroom. Our job as educators in Catholic school is to let young children know that emotions are gifts from God. And although we can feel scared sometimes by those emotions, and they can be out of control sometimes, and I may just be having a total meltdown and a temper tantrum, I need to know as a child that my teacher still loves me, that my teacher is going to give me guidance, and my teacher is going to help me learn how to make better choices in my emotions and respond when someone else's emotions don't feel so good. I know this is a lot of information, and I know you want to dig deeper yet, but I'm going to pause for a moment, and I'm going to hand it over to Nancy for a minute to talk to you about some resources that RCL is developing that I think are going to be wonderful to help you think through this. So Nancy, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide if you want to talk a little bit here about this.
Okay, great. And this will be fast because there are tons of questions that people have for you, Pam. So we just wanted to share with you some of the new videos that we have available for early childhood educators. And so we have 2 from Pam as well as Miss Debbie's tips, which are great videos for utilizing our Stories of God's Love program. So those can be found on our RCL Benziger website. So next one, Pam. Oh, and leading up to one of the great projects that Pam is working on with RCL Benziger, it's a series of 6 videos called My Emotion videos. And these, again, are excellent tools that will help young children experience and help them identify, define, and use their emotions in appropriate ways. Now, these can be used in the classroom, or they could also be used in a family setting. So again, we've got some great things coming out for you real soon. Next slide, Pam. Just again, as a reference point, we have Stories of God's Love, which is our early childhood education program. And it is in 3 ages or stages, ages 3, 4, 4, 5, and kindergarten. And if any of this, if you want more information or need samples, we can connect you with your local sales representative. So again, Stories of God's Love is available in print and also available on Flourish, which is our platform for all of our digital resources. And the next one, Pam. There we go. And don't forget, we also have a very engaging Bible specifically for those littlest of disciples, ages 3 through 7, that's available in English and Spanish, as well as music and a whole catechetical process to help not only read the scripture story, but be able to teach some catechesis out of it as well. Next one. Again, I told you I'd go fast. We have a new trade book by Dr. Tim Hogan, The Gift of Cultural Hurricanes, Tools to Rebuild Authentic Spirituality. And this would just really be a great book for you, for parish leaders, school leaders, small group study, just really to try to tap into what we've experienced over the last couple of years and how to navigate those cultural hurricanes and remain true to our own Catholic spirituality. Next. And here again, you'll get this in the PowerPoint, but if you're looking for more information about Stories of God's Love, or there we have a product brochure, and we also have a catalog, and those are the links to access it. Back to you.
Have arisen in the chat box, and I'd like to give a few minutes to respond if we can to a few more.
We do have a few questions for you, Pam, and one of them is they really like the idea of the I'm sorry option, but if a child did an action where they hurt another student and they know it wasn't a good choice, but choose not to apologize, then what action should we do?
So I just want to make sure I heard it right. So the child is choosing not to apologize. Is that correct? Yes. Although they know they probably should. So I think what's really helpful at that point is to debrief with the child and change the perspective to how would you have felt if your friend did that? Because oftentimes, again, this comes in to think about, we're asking children to sometimes have empathy, and that frontal lobe isn't fully developed. So we have to teach. And part of the way we teach is to help them debrief about how would that feel to you if Anne did that to you? Oh, well, what would you want Anne to do? And sometimes better than sorry is actually, how do you make this better for Anne? What could you do to make it better? And, you may have to give some ideas, but, if I went over and knocked Anne's tower over, maybe a suggestion would be, do you think that Anne might appreciate you helping her rebuild it? So we're taking responsibility for our actions rather than just verbal service, if that
and several people commented in the chat that that's exactly what they would ask the other child and so forth. And some have said that they use the prayer table and invite a child to kind of decompress at the prayer table and to reflect, talk to God quietly and so forth. And then they have that conversation too.
And I love the idea of the prayer table, as long as the prayer table is not seen as a discipline technique. The prayer table has to be more of, and I love the way that they worded that this is, prayer is a really good time when you're feeling overwhelmed. I often turn and talk to God, and I go over and I find a quiet place in my house and I center myself and I remind myself that God loves me no matter what I do. God still loves me. I'm his child, and then when they're calm, we debrief, but we have to be really careful. And this is a fine, fine line that we walk to not make our faith appear as punishment to young children.
That's so important because we want them to feel God's love and we want them to grow in their own relationship with God. Yes. We have a question about a 2-year-old child that's showing frustration but is very delayed in speech and therefore can't use some of those skills to convey what they're mad about. So, what are some strategies
So
that
you
could be
speak to my
used?
heart. My son had an expressive language delay. And so we did fine at home, right? I was that crazy parent that went in and told the teacher, well, we don't see those behaviors at home. He doesn't bite at home, because we were really tuned into his body language. So I often recommend with children that have expressive language delays, sign language is extremely helpful. So if the child doesn't like something that they're doing, you can teach the whole classroom, stop. This means stop. Some simple sign language that the child can use to communicate with the other children, such as, please stop, or I want to eat. And we do this with babies because we find this with young babies, that they become very frustrated and uncontrollable when they want to eat. And they'll often ask for more that they want to eat. So a few simple sign languages that you can use with the child. You still want to help them articulate, but finding a way to communicate. If they don't have the fine motor skills for sign language, you can also use a chart where they can point to things that they might need help with. If that makes sense, you can cut out pictures that they can use, like a pointing chart.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah. And 2-year-olds are tough, right? Because you have some 2-year-olds in your classroom that might be operating at a 3-year-old level, and some that are operating at maybe a 9 or a 10-month-old level. So it's huge.
One of the things we talked about with the My Emotions videos that you've been working with, Pam, are the feelings charts. That will be available with the emotions, and how you and Amy Kronberg, the presenter on the videos, can use that chart to help children point and identify their feelings.
Yeah, it's going
I
to
thought
be
was wonderful.
It's going to be a wonderful resource, and we've taken some traditional music and put a few words into it to where you can even sing with the children. If you have a child that's really frustrated, music helps calm children down. You can sing the feeling song with them, and then the child might be able to point. We can't see the whole classroom all the time, and there are times that we'll hear a commotion in the back and we don't know what happened with the trigger. And these children that I'm talking about, because it's the same child that you automatically think caused the commotion, but they're absent that day, because 9 times out of 10 it is the child that caused the commotion. But these feeling charts will be downloadable, and I think they're a wonderful tool that can be used.
Well, you mentioned something that really addresses the next question, and that is, how do you address a child's emotions if the other children start getting loud and acting out every time you take your focus off of them? So you can't see the whole classroom all the time.
No.
So what are some strategies to handle that?
So part of that is being able to give the children enough skill and have a classroom where they're able to work independently. When I was young, a lot younger, less gray hair and really long hair, and ideal right out of school, I was always trying to kind of make sure that the dramatic play items stayed in the dramatic play area. And what I learned is I was spending a lot of my energy and focus on constantly trying to redirect the children, instead of creating an environment, for a better lack of word, that if I got locked out of my classroom, those children could function safely for the next hour. So we embedded classroom rules, minimal, that were self-regulation tools, such as only 4 people may be over in this area because of space. So as the teacher and as the facilitator of learning in the classroom, you have to step back and think what triggers in the environment may not be working for this group, but might have worked for my classroom last year, right? But these kids are different. So I don't think there's a simple one easy answer. You have to look at the environment. You have to look at the children that are responding. And the other thing that we tend to do is we tend to acknowledge negative behavior instead of acknowledging positive behavior. So we need to spend 80% of our day acknowledging when behaviors are appropriate instead of responding to behaviors when they've escalated.
Sometimes that's hard to keep in mind in a busy classroom, isn't it?
It is in a busy classroom, and just human nature, right? When things are going smoothly, you're sitting back and you're enjoying it, and you're just feeling so blessed that it's going smoothly. But children need attention, whether it's a positive attention or a negative attention. So we have to be really careful with that. And that's hard work.
I'm serious. Thank you, Pam. And another question is, how do you help a child who is diagnosed with ODD?
So tell me more what you mean by ODD. So you're obsessive compulsive disorder. Is that what you're talking about? Or
It does not say here, so if the person could put more into
Yeah.
it's oppositional defiant disorder.
Okay, so if they're diagnosed with ODD, number one, again, you can't be an expert on everything. And if the child's been diagnosed, chances are they're in counseling or they're with a mental health specialist or a therapist. So the best thing that you can do is to sit down with the family in a service plan along with the therapist and decide on the maybe two key elements that you should be implementing at school to support the family and the therapist, because you can't do it all, right? You don't have that background knowledge. And I had to learn a long time ago, I can't fix all of it, but I can fix a couple key things that we're willing to work on. And then again, invite that therapist to teach you a little bit some of the strategies that may work in the environment that they see, and invite them to come to your school.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think maybe if Nancy, if I've not picked out all of the questions, I've tried to group some of them, but I think those were the core of the questions that I have seen. Do you see some others, Nancy?
No, pretty much you did a great job in kind of summarizing the questions. So
Thank you.
yeah, I think all is good.
Well, I thank you all because we're at the end here, but your questions, from the bottom of my heart, when we're doing something virtual, to have this much interaction and to feel like that I was at least able to address some of your questions and provide you with some information. But please, if you haven't finished that survey, do finish that survey, because that's really going to help us guide us on where we're going next with everything. And you are all so absolutely wonderful. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for your dedication. And I'm validating you that this is not easy work. This is a calling for all of you, and this takes hard effort. And you are doing the best that you can, and it is enough. But don't give up. They need you. They need you to be their guidance. May you all have a blessed day, and I wish you the best. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again real soon. Take care.
Thank you, Pam. Again, we thoroughly enjoy and appreciate all that you have to offer. Watch for that master formation series where we're going to do a deep dive into the big emotions with the little ones. So we'll get more information out to you as we develop that series for you. And again, thanks, Pam. We just really appreciate your wisdom and the time. And watch your email for the recording link as well as the PowerPoint presentation. And if you have any additional questions that come to mind afterwards, don't hesitate to give me an email. Thanks again, everybody. God bless. Bye-bye.